From the University of Alaska Anchorage, this is Seawolf Voices, a podcast about the pathways to and from education. I'm your host, Matt Jardin. This episode's guest is Justin Dahl. Justin has a deep appreciation for the way complex systems work, starting as an interest in STEM fields when he was younger. When Justin got older, that focus shifted toward business and public policy, leading him to graduate with a bachelor's in economics from UAA in 2004 and a master's in public administration from the University of Alaska Southeast in 2008. While pursuing his education, Justin took on a job at the Anchorage Police Department and found his passion, staying with APD for the last 24 years, culminating in his position as Chief of Police. In this episode, Justin talks about his non-traditional trajectory as a student, how he discovered his passion for public service, and the importance of law enforcement to maintain an ongoing dialogue with the community. Chief Justin Dahl, thank you so much for joining us on Seawolf Voices.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it. It's fun to get to participate.
My first question to you is, could you please just tell me about your position and the work that you're doing now with the Anchorage Police Department?
I'm Chief of Police here at the Anchorage Police Department, and that means a variety of different things, not the least of which is Chief Executive of a large department in the city. The police department is actually the largest department in the city. And as the chief law enforcement official for Anchorage and for the region, then I have a variety of duties related to that. They vary from sort of the mundane, managing budget and personnel to, crisis management and dealing with emergencies that come up and kind of everything in between.
So why did you choose law enforcement as a career?
It's interesting. I had been attending UAA for a while. And of course, I, grew up in Anchorage and went to high school here and went to school outside for a year, but then came back to UAA and had been attending for a couple of years and was actually had my eye on a career in the military. I think like a lot of people, right? You're going to school, you're kind of trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, and it's all sort of up in the air and can be challenging. And I had spent a summer working down on the Kenai Peninsula, and I got to know a Forest Service ranger there really well, who was a law enforcement agent for the U.S. Forest Service. And I had never really thought about a career in law enforcement before, but that was a very positive experience. And I came back after the summer and was working out at the airport and going to school full time. And I literally happened to be reading the newspaper. Of course, this is 1996. So this was back when we actually had like physical newspapers. And I was on a break from my job and I noticed an advertisement for APD and they were hiring. And I thought, I think that job might be kind of interesting. And the pay looks pretty good compared to what I'm making now. And so why not? And it was not something, lots of people in law enforcement, it's something that, they had always dreamed about, and maybe their college career centered around education that was related to law enforcement. I mean, I had studied math and computer science and sort of transitioned to business and ultimately got my bachelor's degree in economics. So I was really not on any sort of criminal justice track. It was literally, that seems like it could be fun. Maybe I'll try that. And so I sort of fell backwards into it. But once I got through the hiring process and started the police academy and then got out on the road, I mean, it was apparent to me immediately that this was the career for me. I really loved it. And I have definitely enjoyed the last 24 years here.
Two-part question. So your bachelor's in economics and your master's in public administration seem like a jump from where you eventually landed in law enforcement. So firstly, why did you decide on those two academic paths? And secondly, how did you transition from those into law enforcement?
Any of us that have had the college experience like that, how do I pick what I'm going to do? What's going to be my major course of study? All those things are kind of challenging sometimes. And sometimes you think you know what you want, and then you get into it a little bit and you're like, I don't know if this is it. For me, growing up, I had always had an interest in sort of STEM type topics, right? Science, technology, engineering, math, those kinds of things. And so that was really what I thought I wanted to pursue in college. In my first year of college, going to school outside of Alaska, I was pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering. And I enjoyed certain aspects of that, but when I transitioned back to UAA at the time, and of course, this was 1992, so it was a while ago, the mechanical engineering program at UAA was not as strong as it is now. And so I had to kind of look at some other options. And I ended up changing to computer science because that was a very strong interest for me. And of course, if you're going to have a degree in computer science, you might as well double major in math because it's all the same stuff. That was kind of the trajectory I was on, and I did that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed sort of the computer aspects of that. Of course, again, we're talking like 1992, 1993, so I was learning how to program in assembly language for the VAX. And if you know what a VAX is, then it probably dates you. But it was a very old sort of mainframe style with terminal system that the university had at the time, archaic in today's architecture. But I like those things, but it just, the higher level math was starting to drag on me. And I had some friends that were in the business program. And so I sort of gravitated towards that because I also had some interest in that. But again, I mean, all of this is sort of my personal journey, and I think shows when you don't really have that direction and you're not sure what you want to do yet, it can be hard to find that path. And so I was experiencing that. And ultimately, when I got a little bit more into the business program, I started taking economics classes, and I was very interested in economics. And those classes made sense to me, the way my brain worked. I love the idea of looking at, huge data sets and trying to sort of tease out, useful information out of that. And, the study of how people make decisions and allocate scarce resources, which is sort of the foundation of economics. So all of that really spoke to me. And I think that's why ultimately I ended up sort of settling on that. And to be perfectly honest, almost none of my undergraduate college career had any relation to like real world job aspiration. It was just what was interesting to me and what classes, did I like and want to pursue. And it was also lengthy. Like, I think, like, full disclosure, I should probably reveal that my undergraduate career was a lengthy process. And I started in 1991, but I didn't actually graduate until 2004. And there was about a 6 or 7 year break in there, maybe 8 year break, while I worked at APD and didn't go to school at all. So yeah, totally convoluted, torturous path really to get there, but ultimately very happy with my undergraduate degree and the major that I ultimately chose. And then when I came back to go to graduate school, my life in general was a lot more structured and purposeful, and so was my desire for additional education and the path that I chose. If you're not familiar with the Masters of Public Administration program, really what that is, that's a master's program for government managers. And so it's actually completely related to the job that I have now, and it has served me very well. And it's really, people I think are a lot more familiar with the MBA program, right? Masters of Business Administration. That is, that's a master's program for people who want to have advanced management jobs in business or maybe ultimately be executives. The MPA is the same thing for the public sector, basically, or a very similar thing. That actually was done with, a lot more specific thought to my future career in government.
What was it that sealed the deal for you to attend and eventually come back to UAA?
I think for me, the choice to come back to UAA was a variety of things. I think growing up in Anchorage as a high schooler, I experienced what I think a lot of people do, which is a desire to get outside, right? You're like, okay, I grew up here in Anchorage. I want to get out. I want to go to school outside. I mean, I kind of want to get away from, living at home with my family and those kinds of things. And so there was definitely that desire. But I think after I did it for a year, I realized that there were a lot of benefits to, being back at home, essentially, and going to school, and not the least of which was the cost, right, associated with attending college is very high. And if you're paying for room and board on top of everything else, that can be expensive. The in-state tuition for UAA is very attractive compared to out-of-state tuition if you're going to a different university. And so that was certainly a factor for me. Once I had lived out of state for a year, I realized that I really liked living in Alaska. And so I kind of wanted to come back to that as well. So I think all of those things sort of combined to bring me back to UAA. And I'm glad they did. I mean, I think, even at the time, the early 90s, UAA was a good school and had a lot of good programs. Frankly, the UAA of today looks almost nothing like the UAA that I attended. I mean, the campus itself is probably twice as big, with tons of new facilities. And so every now and then when I have an opportunity to be on campus and kind of see some of the infrastructure that's available now, like I'm almost a little bit jealous that I'm not still going to school, because I think it's so much better than what we had then. But what we had, at the time was really good too. So I think it was just all those factors combining to bring me back, and I'm really glad they did. I'm proud of my degree at UAA.
Tell me about your transition from UAA to the quote unquote real world.
So it's interesting, right? Like my undergraduate pathway is so non-traditional that it's in some ways like I'm not sure that I'm a good litmus for what that should look like. But I was going to UAA, and then during that time, I had sort of ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps Reserve, but I was also sort of flirting with officer candidate school and ultimately a career in the military that I used my bachelor's degree for. And while all that was sort of happening, I ended up sort of stumbling into my career at APD. And so my transition to the real world really started before I finished my degree, because I got hired by APD in 1996, and I wasn't done with my bachelor's degree yet. And then I kind of put it on hold for a while and then ultimately came back to it. So, I think in some ways, completing your degree program altogether and then looking for a job, like we all know that is a super challenging thing for students to face. I did it a little bit backwards, but for me, the challenge was getting motivated to come back and finish my bachelor's degree. And I really have my wife to thank for that. She really encouraged me to do that. But there really was a lot of encouragement to do that. And she was right. It was absolutely the right thing to do. I'm so glad I did it. It was good for me personally, for my personal development. It was definitely good for my professional development. And I think it just made me a more well-rounded person all the way around. So really, really happy to have had that encouragement to come back, because it's a huge lift, right? Like if you've launched on a career path, especially a full-time job like law enforcement, and law enforcement is really full-time plus, it can be really hard to try to work that into your life schedule. And it was a challenge to get those classes done. But that was another thing about UAA that was great, is a lot of the class schedules are built around people that have full-time jobs. And so I was able to fit it in. Plus, I was just lucky to work a job like law enforcement that is shift-based, so I could adjust my work schedule to maybe work evenings and weekends and have some time during the day, during the week, to go to class. And I just, I was fortunate to be able to choreograph all that and get it done. And then really the same thing with graduate school. I mean, I've received a lot of encouragement to consider graduate school. And again, I had sort of the ability to be flexible and work out that schedule. So it worked out well. But yeah, that's, like I said, my transition from campus life to real world life was just non-traditional, I think is the best word I can use to describe it.
Is there a particular lesson or experience from your time at UAA that still sticks with you today?
I had the benefit of some very good professors that, while I was sort of trying to sort out my path, I think that was very helpful, talking to them and having them be very encouraging. I think looking back, I mean, those sorts of influences in my life, even though they maybe weren't even that apparent at the time, I think in retrospect, they definitely had an impact. I think, again, you're taking on your initial education through high school, you're polishing that, you're really refining and building on it. And it's hard to see at the time how that is preparing you to be a more organized and critical thinker, to be a better communicator, to be more purposeful in your thoughts and deeds. All of those things, really, your education at UAA is building those. And sometimes I think you don't even notice. And then once you do leave the campus and you get out into sort of the real world, if you want to call it that, I think you look backwards and you realize, oh, wow, now I kind of see how that was, building towards where I am now. But it's hard to see when you're in it sometimes, I think. So, but I certainly, I feel fortunate to have had that experience at UAA and be able to apply it to the rest of my life.
Another multi-part question. I don't want to deviate too much from your story, but I also want to be cognizant of the current climate surrounding law enforcement. So with that said, it appears to me that the relationship between APD and Anchorage is much different from a lot of the other places around the country. So my question to you is, how would you describe that relationship between Anchorage and APD throughout your career, and how do you see that partnership going forward?
No, that's a great question. I mean, that's something that comes up all the time, right? And I'm always happy to talk about it because I think it's really important for us to continue having that discussion. I will tell you, I feel really lucky to work at APD and at an agency that throughout my career has had a pretty good relationship with the community that we serve. And I think that as a leader in APD and ultimately as the senior executive here, I recognize that it's our duty as a leadership team to continually build on the good relationship that APD has with the community that we all inherited as leaders here. And I talk to my leadership team about that all the time. That is a daily thought process for us. We push it down to the very newest employees at APD. The number one asset that we have as a department is that relationship. And it is imperative that we do everything we can to maintain it every day. What I usually remind people, whether it's an internal setting with other employees or externally with a community group, I recognize that it's a relationship. And it's just like any other relationship. If you think about relationships in our personal lives, none of those things just happen by magic, right? It takes effort, it takes daily commitment, and it takes a whole lot of work. And if you just think about, name any relationship in your personal life, whether it's with your partner or spouse or even a family member, like we all know that takes effort. Well, the department's relationship with the community is no different. We have to put effort into that every day. And so we're committed to that at APD. I think we have good commitment throughout the organization for that. And we recognize how critical it is for us to be able to do our jobs effectively for that relationship to be good. So, I mean, if it sounds like I'm on a tear, it's because you've hit on one of my favorite topics. Like, I absolutely believe that we have to maintain that relationship. When the community reaches out to us to ask questions about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, I think it's important for us to engage in those conversations and to talk about those things and for everybody to kind of understand what all that is and why it is. If the community asks us something about what we do or why we do it and we can't explain that, we should probably be questioning what that is. We should always be able to explain what we do to the community in a way to at least they understand what it is. And I'm a realist. Not everybody in the community is always going to agree on the way things should be happening. And we know that, right? Because we're all people. But we should at least be able to explain it in a rational way. So I genuinely think that all of the sort of ongoing conversation about law enforcement's role in our community is good. We're happy to engage in those discussions. I think it's super healthy for the community. I think it's actually a good engagement opportunity for APD. And yeah, we're all in. We're true believers in maintaining that good relationship.
I imagine that your MPA from UAS helps you by giving you that broad overview of building and maintaining relationships with the community.
The way I look at my master's degree, I completed my bachelor's degree. Is a great, mine took a little while, but ultimately very good program. Glad I did it. I learned a lot. And I think we sort of recognize as we come out of that has made us better communicators, more efficient researchers and writers and stuff like that. And the master's program really takes all of that to the next level and truly polishes it. In some ways, I almost think I took more out of my master's program than I did out of my bachelor's program. The bachelor's degree was a great foundation, but the master's program really took my writing, my ability to do real research, and support my writing that way. And frankly, my verbal communication skills really to the next level. And for anybody that's looking for a job as an executive or in some advanced leadership position, I would highly recommend it because it's almost like I didn't know what I didn't know until I started graduate school. And the program director at the University of Southeast, Dr. Anderson, was clear to help me understand the error of my ways, or quick to do that. So, but it was great. I can't say enough good things about the program there. Really enjoyed it. I think that the master's program, I think any master's program is a lot more intimate. You have a lot more direct contact with your professors. And like I said, I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad that I did it.
It's funny. This is a UAA podcast, but I'm glad we get to show some love to our friends at UAS.
It's all University of Alaska system, right? It's all good.
Is there an on-the-job experience that really solidified your decision to pursue a career in law enforcement?
I think, as I mentioned before, I sort of almost stumbled into this career field. And then once I got out, for law enforcement, you get hired, you go to the police academy, and that's about 6 months worth of training. and it's very classroom. It's almost like being in college again, except it's all obviously oriented to actually doing the job of law enforcement. And then you go to field training, which is kind of like on the job training, where you are with a senior officer all the time and they're sort of guiding you to take your first steps of doing the job on your own, letting you make mistakes and learn from them in an environment that's safe, where you're not going to hurt yourself or anybody else or have some sort of disaster befall you. And then ultimately you get turned loose to be a law enforcement officer all by yourself. And I think like in that first year of doing the job solo, you really have some formative experiences. And for me, it was the excitement of being involved in a career in law enforcement, but really seeing that like you got sent to places where people really needed help and you could make a difference like right there on the spot. And I think for me, that really solidified like, yeah, this is the job for me. And then as I moved through my career, the first 10 or 12 years, as an officer before I started promoting, I had an opportunity to do lots of different things. I mean, I got to participate on the SWAT team. I got to be a motorcycle officer. I got to be on the bomb squad. I had this opportunity to do lots of interesting things. And that really, again, sort of reinforced the decision to be in this career field. And I finally got to a point in my career where I realized, I probably had something to offer as a member of the leadership team. And that's when I kind of started moving up. And I think that's really when my education started to be especially helpful, as I started kind of moving into those positions.
Last question. What advice do you have to anyone thinking about pursuing a career in law enforcement?
Well, I think that my first piece of advice would be to go for it. Right now, there's all this narrative that's frankly kind of anti-law enforcement in a lot of ways. When I say that, I want to make it clear that I'm totally acknowledging that there are some problems with law enforcement throughout the country and some things that we need to have a discussion with our communities about and work to make better. But I will say that this is still a good career field, especially for people that want to make a difference. And the sort of negative slant to some of those discussions, I think I'm concerned will dissuade people from choosing a career in law enforcement. And that's the only way this career field continues to get better and continues to be a positive force in our communities, is if good people step forward to do it. And I'm worried that all of this sort of negative attention will have a chilling effect on people, the types of people that we really want to be stepping forward into this role, right? People who have a service-oriented mindset, who want to take care of their community. We definitely don't want people that come in that, are, desperate for the authority or badge heavy or anything like that. And so I do have some concerns that we could have problem recruiting people, good people into the career field. So anybody that's considering this, I would say it is still a good job, especially in Anchorage. We feel the support of the community every day. This is a great place to work. It's a good, clean department with people who have very high ethical standards working here. And so I would encourage anyone that's interested to apply. And if for some reason Anchorage isn't the place for you and you want to get into law enforcement someplace else, I would still encourage you and go make a difference in that department and make it what I think we have at APD, which is, a really good place to work that is very oriented towards serving the community.
Chief Dahl, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
In all honesty, I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you, Matt. It was fun for me, and I hope people find it interesting.
Seawolf Voices is a production of the University of Alaska Anchorage Office of Advancement and Alumni Relations.